I don't remember the exact moment the world started shrinking, but I know it began with a rug. A simple, frayed thing in my living room, the kind you don't notice until it betrays you. One misstep, one fleeting loss of balance, and I was on the floor, bruised but unbroken. I laughed it off, the way you do when you're 78 and still stubborn enough to believe you're invincible. But that fall wasn't just a stumble, it was the crack that let the cold in, the moment my son Daniel decided I was no longer a mother, but a problem. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to find it again in the places I least expected. Stay with me, it's not an easy tale, but it's mine, and it's worth telling. The morning after the fall, I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. My house in Portland's suburbs was a quiet place, all creaky floorboards and memories tucked into every corner. The roses outside my window bloomed with stories of Richard, my husband, who'd planted them decades ago. The kitchen still carried the faint scent of his coffee, though he'd been gone 3 years. I wasn't ready to leave this house. I didn't need to. But Daniel didn't ask. He stood in my living room, briefcase in hand, his eyes distant, like he was looking through me. "Mom, we found a really good facility," he said, his voice clipped, efficient. "It's time. It's the best for everyone." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Daniel, I'm fine. This is my home." But his face didn't soften. He didn't laugh. Instead, he handed me a brochure, glossy and cold, with smiling seniors and words like care and comfort. My chest tightened. "You fell," he said, as if that single word justified everything. "You could have broken your hip. You live alone. It's too risky. Frankly, I don't have time to keep checking in." He said it without cruelty, but that made it worse, like I was a task to be delegated, a box to be checked. I tried to argue, but the words caught in my throat. 2 strangers arrived, moving my boxes with mechanical precision. My life, photo albums, Richard's old records, the quilt I'd sewn for Daniel's 10th birthday, reduced to cardboard. I stood in the hallway, gripping the doorframe, watching my world dismantled. The van they took me in smelled of bleach and abandonment. I wasn't even allowed to ride in Daniel's car. As we pulled away from the house, the roses blurred through my tears, and a silence settled into my bones, deeper than any I'd ever known. The facility was modern, with big windows and neutral walls, but it reeked of erasure. My name was on a label stuck to the door, room 214, like I was a package someone had finally stored away. Daniel said, "I'll check in later this week. You'll be comfortable here." Then he left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I didn't cry right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bare walls, my suitcase at my feet. The home I'd built with Richard, filled with laughter and Sunday mornings, now lived only in my head. I wasn't old enough to forget, but I was old enough to be forgotten. That night, I lay in a bed that wasn't mine, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly in the hallway. I thought of Richard, how we'd promised to grow old together, to take care of each other. Now he was gone, and my son had put me away like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. Not yet. Something stirred in me, a flicker of defiance, quiet but fierce. They thought I was finished, but they had no idea what I was capable of. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning, my heart whispering that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a fight I hadn't known I'd have to wage. The next morning, I woke to the sound of wheels rolling down the hallway, med carts, I'd later learn. The air carried the smell of scrambled eggs and overboiled coffee, institutional and lifeless. I dressed slowly, every movement a small act of control. In the hallway, staff offered polite nods, their smiles tight, practiced. I was part of the furniture now, invisible in plain sight. The common area was a blur of muted conversations and game show noise. Residents stared blankly or dozed with untouched juice cups beside them. I sat by a window, the gray sky pressing down, a squirrel hopping along the fence outside. For a moment, I envied its freedom, no paperwork, no betrayal. Daniel didn't call that day, or the next. On the 4th day, he appeared, his shirt tucked in, straight from work. He handed me a stack of insurance documents and 3 photos, him as a child, Richard holding him as a baby, and one of me, cropped from a family vacation like an afterthought. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, his voice edged with impatience, hoping I'd say no. I wanted to scream, to ask why he'd done this, but I knew his answer: "This is easier." So I said nothing. "You're quiet," he remarked. "I'm thinking," I replied, and he shifted, unsettled by even that small resistance. Then he said, "It's not like I don't care, Mom, but you've had your time. Let me handle things." Had my time? As if life expired, as if I had nothing left to offer. He left after 10 minutes, no hug, no warmth, just a task completed. The week blurred, scheduled meals, bingo with meaningless prizes. I smiled at other residents, but most were lost in their own silence, their stories trapped behind tired eyes. The cruelest part of this place wasn't the boredom, it was the erasure. No one knew I'd been a librarian, played piano for Richard every Sunday, or read every Steinbeck novel twice. I was just room 214, a fall risk, an old woman whose time had passed. Then one afternoon, a nurse walked in, clipboard in hand, her smile gentle but tired, like she carried too much for too long. "Mrs. Walsh? I'm Marissa. I'll be checking in this week." Her eyes met mine, and something shifted. She sat down, closer than the others, and asked, "Is there anything you want me to know about you?" It was so simple, but no one had asked since I arrived. I hesitated, then said, "I like crossword puzzles. I make a mean lemon meringue pie. And I still remember the smell of my husband's shaving cream." Marissa smiled, not with pity, but with warmth. "That's good. I'd like to know more." She came back the next day, and the next, bringing tea from the break room, calling me Eleanor instead of Mrs. Walsh. She remembered my favorite singer from the 70s, told me about her daughter, Mia, and her mother with Alzheimer's. Her voice carried weight, but she never complained. Slowly, she became the only reason I didn't fade away. I still missed my house, Richard, and the life Daniel had stolen, but for the first time, I wasn't just waiting to disappear. I was watching, listening, learning who was on my side, and who never had been. Somewhere in that sterile silence, I began to understand, this wasn't just a nursing home. It was the stage for a battle I was only beginning to fight. The days in the facility settled into a rhythm, like the slow drip of a faucet you can't fix. Breakfast at 7, pills at 8, lunch at noon, bingo, or a sing-along by 3. The routine was supposed to comfort, but it felt like a cage, each hour a reminder that my life was no longer mine. Yet, in that sterile haze, Marissa became my anchor. Her presence was a quiet rebellion against the erasure that clung to these walls. She saw me, Eleanor, not room 214, and that alone was enough to keep the spark of defiance burning in my chest. I was 78, betrayed by my own blood, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Marissa's visits were the highlight of my days. She'd slip into my room with a cup of chamomile tea, real leaves, not the powdered kind, and we'd talk. Not about the weather or my chart, but about life. She told me about Mia, her 6-year-old daughter, who loved peanut butter sandwiches and insisted on a hallway light to keep nightmares at bay. "Smart girl," I said once, and Marissa laughed, her voice cracking slightly. "Smarter than me most days." I noticed her hands then, calloused, nails trimmed short, the hands of someone who carried the world alone. She was 29, working double shifts to pay for her mother's care, her own dreams tucked away like old letters. One afternoon, we sat in the small garden behind the facility, a patch of grass and wilted flowers hemmed in by a chain-link fence. The air smelled of damp earth and distant rain, Portland's autumn settling in with a gray chill. Marissa's scrubs were slightly wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but her eyes held that steady warmth. "My mom used to love gardens," she said, plucking a blade of grass. She'd spend hours out back, talking to her roses like they could hear her. I smiled, picturing Richard with his clippers, muttering to our roses about the weather. "Mine too," I said. "Still do, when I get the chance." She looked at me, curious. "You miss it?" Your house, I mean. The question cut deeper than I expected. I nodded, my throat tight. Every day. The roses, the kitchen, the way the light hit the living room at dusk. But mostly, I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. Marissa didn't offer platitudes. She just nodded, her silence a kind of understanding that didn't need words. That was her gift, she listened, not to fix, but to hear. Daniel hadn't visited since that first week. His absence was louder than his presence, a confirmation of what I'd begun to suspect. I wasn't his mother anymore, just a loose end. I kept his photos on my nightstand, though, staring at the boy he'd been, gap-toothed, laughing, clinging to my hand during thunderstorms. I'd loved him so fiercely, forgiven his teenage lies, his adult silences. But now, that love felt like a weight, a chain I wasn't sure I could break. Marissa noticed me staring at the photos one day. Your son? She asked, gentle but direct. I nodded. He's complicated. She didn't press, but her eyes held a question she was too kind to ask. The facility's routine ground on, each day blending into the next. I began to notice the little things, the way staff knocked twice before entering, the way residents' eyes glazed over during group activities, their stories buried under layers of medication and neglect. I wasn't like them, not yet. I still remembered the smell of Richard's shaving cream, the weight of a book in my hands, the satisfaction of a perfect lemon meringue pie. But I could feel the place trying to strip that away, to reduce me to a schedule, a chart, a name on a door. One morning, after a breakfast of watery oatmeal, I asked Marissa if she could help me find my lawyer's number. Her eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. Of course. I'll get a phone and a quiet spot. She didn't ask why, but I saw the spark of understanding in her gaze. She knew something was shifting, something bigger than our daily chats. That afternoon, I called James Palmer, our family attorney for decades. His voice was warm, familiar. Eleanor, it's been too long. I didn't waste time. I need to change my will, James. And I want to start paperwork for an adult adoption. There was a pause, then, are you sure? I gripped the phone. I've never been more certain. That same day, I wrote 2 letters. One to Daniel, short and cold, stating only what needed to be said. The other to Marissa, sealed and tucked into my nightstand drawer. I wasn't ready to give it to her yet, but when the time came, I wanted her to know she was more than a nurse, she was family. I didn't tell her about the will or the adoption. Instead, we kept our routine, tea, talks about me as spelling homework, the way the rain sounded on the facility's roof. But inside, I was changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had a purpose, a quiet mission to rewrite my legacy. One evening, as we sat in the garden, the air cool and the sun dipping low, I handed Marissa a small envelope. Not for now, I said. For when it matters. She looked at me, her brow furrowing. You're not sick, are you? I laughed softly. No, dear. I'm just awake. We sat in silence after that, our shoulders almost touching, the stars beginning to peek through the dusk. I didn't tell her I'd rewritten my will, that half my estate, my house, savings, everything, now belonged to her. It wasn't about money, it was about clarity, about choosing who deserved my heart. As the days passed, I kept a journal, leather-bound and smelling of old bookstores. I wrote about Richard, about the betrayal that still echoed in Daniel's voice when he'd said, "You've had your time." Each word was a stitch, closing a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. Marissa noticed the journal one day, her eyes lingering on its worn cover. You're writing a lot, she said, not prying, just observing. Memories, I replied. And maybe a map, for what comes next. She smiled, unaware that she was the destination. The leaves outside turned a sharp, rust-colored red, falling like paper memories. I watched them one morning, sipping Marissa's chamomile tea, and felt something settle in me. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore, I was fighting for my name, my story, my right to be seen. Daniel thought he could decide my ending, but he was wrong. I was writing it myself, with every conversation, every letter, every choice. And if he thought he could silence me, he was about to learn just how loud a quiet woman could be. The air in the facility grew heavier as October deepened, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones and makes you long for a hearth you no longer have. Outside, Portland's trees burned with crimson and gold, their leaves drifting like embers against the gray sky. Inside, the walls stayed beige, the lights too bright, the silence too thick. I was learning to navigate this place, to see its cracks, the way the staff's smiles faltered when they thought no one was watching, the way residents clutched their trays like lifelines. But Marissa kept me grounded, her warmth a tether to the woman I'd been before Daniel decided I was disposable. I was Eleanor Walsh, and I was planning something bigger than escape. I was reclaiming my life. Marissa's visits grew longer, stolen moments between her rounds. She'd bring me tea or a dog-eared paperback from the staff lounge, and we'd sit by the garden, the chain-link fence a constant reminder of my confinement. The garden smelled of wet soil and fading roses, a faint echo of my old yard. One afternoon, she told me about her mother's Alzheimer's, how she'd moved her into her apartment to avoid a place like this. She forgets my name sometimes, Marissa said, her voice steady but her eyes distant. But she remembers my hands. Says they feel like home. I nodded, thinking of Richard's hands, calloused from years of tending our roses. That's what matters, I said. The things that stay. Her story stirred something in me, a recognition of sacrifice, of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. I saw myself in her, the younger me, who'd stayed up through Daniel's fevers, who'd skipped vacations to pay for his baseball camp. But where I'd ended up here, Marissa deserved better. That thought hardened my resolve. The will was changed, the adoption paperwork filed, but I wasn't done. I needed to protect her, to ensure Daniel couldn't touch what I'd given her. He was still out there, silent but lurking, and I knew silence from him was never empty. Daniel's absence stretched into weeks. His photos on my nightstand felt like relics, the boy in them a stranger to the man he'd become. I'd catch myself staring, tracing the curve of his childhood smile, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Had I loved him too much? Not enough? Richard had warned me once, years ago, that Daniel was growing selfish, his ambition sharper than his heart. I'd brushed it off, blind to the truth. Now, that truth was a knife, and I was bleeding. One morning, I woke to a commotion in the hallway, muffled voices, the clatter of a dropped tray. I cracked my door open, peering out. 2 staff members were whispering near the nurse's station, their faces tight. "They're doing audits again," one said. "Someone's been fudging records." My heart quickened. I didn't know what it meant, but I filed it away, a piece of a puzzle I was still assembling. Later, Marissa confirmed it. "Management's in a panic," she said, handing me a cup of tea. "They're checking everyone's charts. Something about missing meds." Her eyes met mine, a silent question, did I know anything? I shook my head, but my mind was racing. If records were being scrutinized, maybe there was a way to use that. That afternoon, I asked Marissa to help me get a message to James, my lawyer. "Nothing big," I lied, "just a follow-up." She nodded, her trust in me unwavering. I wrote a note, cryptic but clear, "Check the facility's records. Look for discrepancies in my file." I didn't know what James would find, but I had a feeling Daniel's efficiency extended beyond packing my boxes. He'd always been meticulous, the kind of man who'd cover his tracks, but no one's perfect. Not even him. Marissa became my eyes and ears. She didn't pry, but she listened when I dropped hints, her instincts sharp. One day, she mentioned a new nurse, Kristen, who worked nights and seemed nervous, always glancing over her shoulder. "She saw something," Marissa said, lowering her voice. "Won't say what, but she's scared." I filed that away too. Kristen could be a key, someone who'd seen Daniel's shadow moving through this place. I didn't push Marissa to dig deeper, she was already risking enough, but I knew she'd come through if I needed her. The journal I kept grew thicker, its pages a map of my thoughts. I wrote about Richard, about the night he died, a heart attack, they'd said, alone in his office. I'd always accepted it, but now, doubts crept in. Daniel had been nearby that night, working late, he'd said. But he hadn't answered Richard's call. I remembered his dry eyes at the hospital, his calm efficiency while I fell apart. Had he known? Had he chosen not to help? The thought was a poison, slow and cold, but I couldn't shake it. I wrote it down, every detail, every suspicion, as if putting it on paper could make it real or banish it. One evening, as the sky turned bruise purple, Marissa and I sat in the garden, the air sharp with coming rain. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped. "Mia's sick," she said. "Just a virus, but I was up all night." I touched her arm. "Do you ever get a break?" She smiled, hollow. "When she's grown. Right now, she needs me." Her words echoed in me, a mirror to my own life. I'd needed Daniel once, but he'd walked away. Marissa wouldn't. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name. That night, I pulled out the envelope for Marissa, the one I'd sealed weeks ago. I added a new note, "You're my daughter, in every way that matters." I didn't give it to her yet, but holding it felt like a vow. I was building something, not just for me, but for her, for Mia, for the family I was choosing. Daniel thought he'd won when he locked me away, but he'd only lit a fire. I was awake now, and I was watching. The leaves kept falling outside, each one a reminder that time was moving, and so was I. I didn't know how close the storm was, but I felt it coming, and when it hit, I'd be ready to stand in the rain. The facility's hum grew louder in my ears, a constant drone of fluorescent lights and shuffling feet that seemed to mock the life I'd lost. Portland's autumn pressed against the windows, the air thick with the scent of wet pavement and decaying leaves, a reminder of the world moving on without me. But I wasn't fading, not yet. Marissa's presence kept me sharp, her laughter a lifeline in this beige purgatory. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, betrayed by my son, but I was also something else now, a woman with a plan, a purpose, and a fire that refused to die. Daniel thought he'd buried me here, but he'd only planted a seed, and it was growing. Marissa's visits were my sanctuary. She'd slip into my room with a thermos of tea or a story about Mia, her daughter's latest obsession with drawing butterflies. One morning, she brought a small potted daisy, its petals bright against the sterile walls. "Thought you could use some color," she said, setting it on my nightstand. I touched the leaves, their softness a contrast to the hard edges of this place. "You're too good to me," I said, and she waved it off, but her eyes held a warmth that made my chest ache. She didn't know about the will, the adoption, the letter in my drawer, but she didn't need to. Her kindness wasn't transactional, it was real. The facility's routine ground on, each day a mirror of the last. I watched the other residents, their faces etched with resignation, and felt a quiet terror that I could become them. But I also saw the staff's patterns, the way they rushed through rounds, the way some charts were left unattended. I'd been a librarian once, trained to notice details, to catalog the world. Now, I cataloged this place, every glance, every whisper, every irregularity. The audit Marissa mentioned was still ongoing, and I sensed an opportunity. If Daniel had tampered with my records, as I suspected, there might be evidence, a thread to pull. One afternoon, I caught Kristen, the night shift nurse, alone in the laundry room, folding towels with nervous precision. Her eyes darted up as I approached. "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice low. "Off the record." She stiffened but nodded. "You saw my son here, didn't you?" "Late, not visiting me." She swallowed, her hands pausing. "Yes," she whispered. "He was in the office, arguing. Something about paperwork." My pulse quickened. "Did you hear anything specific?" She hesitated, then said, something about getting someone declared unfit. I thanked her and walked away, my heart pounding. Daniel wasn't just neglecting me, he was plotting. That night, I lay awake, the fluorescent hum seeping into my thoughts. Kristen's words confirmed what I'd feared. Daniel was building a case to strip me of my rights, to make me legally invisible. I thought of Richard's death again, the heart attack that came too suddenly. Daniel had been in the office that night, close enough to hear the phone, to answer his father's call. But he hadn't. The memory of his dry eyes at the hospital, his calm while I shattered, took on a new shape. Had he let Richard die to avoid the company's debts he'd helped create? The thought was a blade, slicing through years of denial. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, Marissa noticed my quiet. "You okay, Eleanor?" she asked, setting a cup of tea beside me. I forced a smile. "Just thinking." She didn't push, but her gaze lingered, as if she could see the storm brewing in me. I wanted to tell her everything, the will, the adoption, Daniel's betrayal, but I held back. She was already carrying too much, Mia's fevers, her mother's illness, the weight of double shifts. Instead, I asked about her day, letting her voice pull me back from the edge. Later, I called James again, my lawyer's number now etched in my mind. "I need you to dig deeper," I said. "Check my medical records here. Look for anything that doesn't add up, meds I didn't take, notes I didn't make." He promised to investigate, his voice steady but curious. "You're stirring something up, Eleanor. Be careful." I hung up, my hands trembling not with fear, but with clarity. Careful wasn't an option anymore. I was at war, and my weapons were truth and time. Marissa became my unwitting ally. She didn't know the full scope of my plans, but she sensed their weight. One evening, as we sat in the garden, the air sharp with the promise of frost, she mentioned Kristen again. "She's jumpy," Marissa said, her brow furrowed. "Keep saying she saw something she shouldn't have." I nodded, my mind racing. "Keep an eye on her," I said, casual but deliberate. Marissa's eyes met mine, a flicker of understanding passing between us. She was smart, intuitive. She'd find what I needed without me asking. My journal grew heavier, its pages a ledger of my fight. I wrote about Daniel, about the boy who'd once run to me with scraped knees, now a man who saw me as a burden. I wrote about Richard, about the night I lost him, and the questions I'd never dared ask. And I wrote about Marissa, about the daughter I was choosing, the legacy I was building. Each word was a step toward freedom, a way to anchor myself against the tide of this place. One night, as the rain battered the windows, I pulled out Marissa's letter again. I added a line, "You've given me back my voice." I sealed it, my hand steady. The facility thought it could erase me, but I was rewriting my story. Daniel thought he could control me, but he'd underestimated the woman he'd locked away. The leaves outside kept falling, the world turning, and I was turning with it. I didn't know how close Daniel was to striking, but I felt the tension, like a bowstring pulled taut. When it snapped, I'd be ready, not just to survive, but to win. The rain came harder now, a relentless drumming on the facility's roof that matched the pulse in my temples. Portland's autumn had turned raw, the air thick with the scent of wet asphalt and pine, a world alive beyond these walls. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting shadows that felt like they were watching. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, a widow, a mother betrayed, but also a woman waking up. Marissa's kindness had lit a fire in me, and Daniel's silence was fanning it. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore, I was fighting for my name, my truth, and the legacy I'd chosen. The game was changing, and I was ready to play. Marissa's visits were my lifeline, each one a thread stitching me back together. She'd bring small gifts, a packet of chamomile tea, a sketch Mia had made of a lopsided sunflower, and her presence softened the edges of this place. One morning, as we sat by the garden, the grass slick with rain, she told me about her mother's latest episode. "She called me her sister yesterday," Marissa said, her voice steady but her fingers twisting a blade of grass. I just smiled and went with it. "What else can you do?" I touched her arm. "You keep showing up. That's enough." She nodded, but her eyes were heavy, carrying a weight I recognized, love mixed with loss. Her stories fueled my resolve. Marissa was sacrificing everything for her family, while Daniel had sacrificed me for convenience. The contrast was stark, and it clarified what I had to do. The will was changed, the adoption filed, but I needed more, proof that Daniel's betrayal ran deeper than neglect. Kristen's words about him arguing in the office haunted me. Getting someone declared unfit, she'd said. It wasn't just a hunch anymore, it was a plan, and I needed to expose it before he could act. The facility's audit was my chance. Whispers among the staff grew louder, missing meds, altered charts, signatures that didn't match. I watched from the edges, a silent observer in a world that thought I was invisible. One afternoon, I saw Kristen slip a folder into a locked drawer at the nurse's station, her hands shaking. She glanced around, didn't see me, but I saw her fear. Later, I told Marissa, keeping my voice casual. Kristen's hiding something. Maybe it's nothing, but, Marissa's eyes sharpened. I'll keep watch, she said, no questions asked. She trusted me, and that trust was a weapon I wielded carefully. My journal became my war room. I wrote about Daniel's visit, his cold efficiency, the way he'd said, "You've had your time." I wrote about Richard's death, the details I'd buried, his late-night call, Daniel's absence, the hospital's sterile quiet. The more I wrote, the clearer it became, Daniel hadn't just failed to save his father, he'd chosen not to, protecting himself from the company's debts he'd helped rack up. The realization was a slow poison, but it sharpened my focus. I wasn't just fighting for my future, I was fighting for Richard's memory, for the truth he deserved. One evening, as the rain turned to a fine mist, Marissa and I sat in my room, the daisy on my nightstand drooping slightly. She looked exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, but she still smiled. "Mia's drawing you a picture," she said. "Says it's for your garden." I chuckled, but my mind was elsewhere. "Marissa," I said, hesitant, "if I needed you to do something risky, would you?" She didn't blink. "Depends on what it is. But I'm here." I nodded, not ready to lay it all bare, but her answer was enough. She was my ally, my daughter in all but name. The next morning, I called James again, my voice low to avoid the staff's ears. "Any progress on the records?" I asked. He sighed. "Something's off, Eleanor. Your chart shows meds you never took, evaluations you never had. It's sloppy, like someone rushed it." My heart raced. "Can you prove who?" He paused. "Not yet, but I'm close. Stay sharp." I hung up, my hand steady. Sloppy meant mistakes, and mistakes meant leverage. That night, I woke to voices in the hallway, low and urgent. I slipped out of bed, my shawl tied around my shoulders, and cracked the door. At the far end, near the administrator's office, stood Daniel. My breath caught. He wasn't supposed to be here, he'd told me he was out of town. He was gesturing sharply, talking to a man in a gray suit, someone I didn't know. Their voices were hushed, but one phrase cut through: "If she changes that will, I lose everything." The man, a lawyer, I guessed, sighed. "It's her legal right, Daniel. You can't stop her." Daniel's voice hardened. "She's not thinking clearly. I want a psychological evaluation. Something official. If she's declared incompetent, the will's void." I stepped back, my blood ice. He wasn't just planning, he was executing. Declaring me unfit would give him control, not just of my money, but of me. I shut the door, my heart pounding, and sat on the bed, trembling. The betrayal wasn't new, but its depth was a fresh wound. And then, like a tide, memories of Richard surged, his call that night, Daniel's dry eyes, the debts he'd dodged. I saw it now, clear as the rain outside. Daniel hadn't just let his father die, he'd gambled with his life and won. But he wouldn't win with me. I reached for my journal, writing until my hand cramped. He thinks I'm weak, but he's wrong. I'm awake, and I'm not alone. Marissa's letter sat in my drawer, a promise I'd soon deliver. The facility thought it could cage me, Daniel thought he could erase me, but they didn't know the woman they'd awakened. The rain kept falling, a steady rhythm, and I let it lull me into resolve. A storm was coming, and I wasn't just ready, I was the lightning. The rain didn't stop, a gray curtain that cloaked Portland in a mournful hush, mirroring the weight in my chest. The facility's walls seemed to close in, their beige sameness a mockery of the vibrant life I'd once known, roses in my yard, Richard's laughter, the smell of fresh bread in my kitchen. But I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, and I was not done. Marissa's unwavering presence kept me tethered, her kindness a beacon in this sterile limbo. Daniel's betrayal had cut deep, but his latest move, plotting to declare me unfit, had turned my grief to steel. I'd overheard his plan, and now I was ready to fight, not just for my freedom, but for my truth. Marissa sensed the shift in me. She didn't know the details, but her eyes caught the way I gripped my journal, the way my smiles grew rarer. One morning, as we sat in the garden, the air sharp with wet earth and fading flowers, she handed me a small notebook, its cover worn but sturdy. "For your thoughts," she said. "You look like you're carrying a lot of them." I took it, my fingers tracing the leather, and felt a surge of gratitude. "You see too much," I said, half joking. She smiled, soft but knowing. "Only what you let me." Her trust was a gift, one I couldn't squander. I hadn't told her about Daniel's late-night meeting, the lawyer, the chilling words, "If she's declared incompetent, the will's void." But I needed her help, now more than ever. Kristen's confirmation that Daniel had been in the office, arguing about paperwork, was a start, but I needed more, proof that couldn't be dismissed. The facility's audit was still ongoing, and James, my lawyer, had found discrepancies in my records. It wasn't enough to accuse Daniel yet, but it was a crack in his armor, and I was determined to pry it open. I began to move with purpose. During meals, I listened to the staff's hushed complaints about the audit, missing signatures, altered logs. I watched Kristen, her nervous glances, the way she avoided the administrator's office. One afternoon, I found her alone in the hallway, stacking clean linens. "Kristen," I said, my voice low, "I know you're scared, but I need your help." Her eyes widened, but she didn't bolt. "I didn't hear much," she whispered. "Just, your son said something about an evaluation. He was angry." I nodded, my heart racing. "If you hear anything else, tell Marissa. Please." She hesitated, then gave a quick nod before hurrying away. Marissa was my bridge to the outside. I asked her to pass another message to James, focus on the evaluation order. Check who signed it. She didn't question me, just slipped the note into her pocket with a quiet, "I've got you." Her loyalty was a lifeline, but it came with a pang of guilt. She was already stretched thin, Mia's illnesses, her mother's Alzheimer's, the endless shifts. Yet she showed up, every day, with a smile that made this place bearable. I vowed to protect her, to make sure my fight didn't pull her under. My journal was now a battlefield, its pages filled with every detail, Daniel's words, Kristen's whispers, the audit's chaos. I wrote about Richard, too, the night he died, replaying like a broken record. The hospital had said heart attack, sudden, no one to blame. But Daniel had been there, in the office, close enough to hear the phone. I remembered his calm at the funeral, his quick pivot to the company's finances. Had he known about the debts, the ones he'd helped accrue? Had he let Richard die to save himself? The question was a wound, raw and festering, but it fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for me, I was fighting for the truth Richard deserved. One evening, as the rain softened to a drizzle, Marissa and I sat in my room, the daisy on my nightstand wilting but still bright. She looked worn, her eyes shadowed. "You're pushing yourself too hard," I said. She shrugged. "Mia needs me. Mom needs me. You," she trailed off, smiling. "You're easy." I laughed, but it was hollow. "I'm trouble, and you know it." She leaned forward, serious. "You're worth it, Eleanor." Her words hit hard, a reminder of what I was fighting for, not just survival, but a life where I mattered. That night, I pulled out Marissa's letter, adding a new line, "You're my reason to keep going." I sealed it, my hand steady. The envelope was more than words, it was a promise, a legacy I was building for her and Mia. But the fight was far from over. James called the next day, his voice tense. The evaluation order came from Dr. Levon, the medical director. It's dated the day after Daniel's late-night visit. No exam, no consultation, just his signature. My breath caught. Can you challenge it? He paused. I'm working on it. But Eleanor, if they move you to psych, it's harder to fight. Psych. The word was a cold fist in my gut. Daniel wasn't just plotting, he was closing in. The next morning, a new nurse delivered a message. I was being transferred for observation. Her voice was mechanical, her eyes avoiding mine. A few days, to ensure your safety. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Safety from what? Knowing my son's a vulture? She didn't answer. 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair, their faces blank. Protocol, they said when I refused it. I sat, not because I accepted it, but because I knew resistance would feed their narrative. They wheeled me through a locked door, the click echoing like a cell slamming shut. The air turned sterile, the walls a sickly green. My new room was smaller, the bed bolted down, the window safety glass. No phone. No Marissa. I sat on the bed, my heart pounding. Daniel had played his card, and I was trapped. But I wasn't broken. I thought of Marissa, her steady hands, her promise. She'd find me. She'd fight for me. And I'd fight for her, for Richard, for the woman I still was. The rain outside kept falling, a steady rhythm, and I let it anchor me. They could lock me away, but they couldn't silence me. Not yet. Not ever. The psychiatric wing was a different kind of prison, its silence sharper, its air heavier with the weight of despair. The green walls seemed to pulse under the fluorescent glare, and the bolted bed in my new room felt like a taunt. Outside, Portland's rain battered the safety glass, a muffled roar that couldn't drown out the truth. Daniel had locked me away, not to protect me, but to erase me. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, a mother betrayed, a widow with questions, and now a woman caged. But I wasn't defeated. Marissa's face, her steady eyes, her warm laugh, kept me anchored. I believed in her, and that belief was my strength. The first night was endless. The lights outside my door never dimmed, their glow seeping through the gap like a cruel spotlight. I didn't sleep, didn't move, just sat on the bed, my shawl tied around me, replaying Daniel's words, if she's declared incompetent, the will's void. He wasn't just after my money, he wanted my voice, my agency, my existence. I thought of Richard, alone in his office, clutching his chest, dialing Daniel's number. The son who didn't answer, who stood dry-eyed at the funeral while I shattered. The truth I'd buried was clawing its way out. Daniel hadn't just failed his father, he'd chosen to let him die. That betrayal, twinned with this one, was a fire in my veins. They brought pills at dawn, small and white, meant to dull me. I refused them, my voice calm but firm. The nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a tight bun, sighed. You need rest, Mrs. Walsh. You're agitated. I almost laughed. I'm not agitated. I'm awake. She marked my chart, uncooperative, no doubt, and left. I knew the game, every refusal, every sharp word, was evidence for Daniel's case. But I wouldn't give them the breakdown they wanted. I'd give them clarity, cold and unyielding. The days blurred, each one a test of endurance. No Marissa, no garden, no journal, just me and the green walls. I memorized the staff's routines, the morning med cart, the afternoon checks, the night shift's softer footsteps. I listened to the whispers outside my door, catching fragments of truth. She's lucid, one nurse said, her voice low. More coherent than half the staff. Another replied, orders are orders. That flicker of dissent was a lifeline. Not everyone was blind, but they were following Daniel's script, and time was slipping. A social worker came on the second day, a young man named Kevin with a clipboard and a forced smile. Just routine questions, Mrs. Walsh, he said, pen poised. I stared at him. Don't waste your breath. You're here to validate paperwork, not help me. He blinked, rattled. That's not true. I leaned forward. Then let me make a phone call. He hesitated. That's not permitted without physician approval. I sat back, my point made. He left after 15 minutes, my calm refusal a crack in their narrative. They wanted a confused old woman, I gave them a warrior. I thought of Marissa constantly, her hands calloused from work, her laugh that warmed the coldest corners of this place. I didn't know what she was doing, but I knew she wouldn't abandon me. She'd seen me, Eleanor, not a chart, and that was enough to keep me fighting. I pictured her with Mia, reading bedtime stories, or with her mother, holding hands through the fog of Alzheimer's. She was out there, carrying her own battles, but I trusted she'd carry mine too. The letter I'd written her, still in my old room's drawer, was my anchor. It held my truth, my love, my choice. The third day brought a new nurse, her voice clipped as she announced a mandatory evaluation scheduled for tomorrow. Dr. Levin's orders, she said, avoiding my eyes. Levon, the medical director who'd signed the transfer without ever meeting me, was Daniel's puppet. I nodded, my mind racing. An evaluation meant a report, a step toward declaring me unfit. If they succeeded, Daniel would control everything, my estate, my will, my life. But I wasn't helpless. I had James, digging into the records, and Marissa, my eyes beyond these walls. I just needed time. That night, I lay still, pretending to sleep as the night nurse checked my room. The rain had slowed, leaving a quiet that felt like a held breath. I thought of Richard, his plaid slippers, the way he'd hum off-key while pruning our roses. "I'm sorry," I whispered to his memory. I didn't see it then. I hadn't seen Daniel's heart turning cold, his ambition swallowing his humanity. But I saw it now, and I wouldn't let him win. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. Every detail mattered, the nurses' names, the orderlies' shifts, the words I'd overheard. I was building a case, not just for my freedom, but for justice. By morning, the rain was gone, replaced by a pale sun that barely warmed the room. They let me shower, gave me clean clothes, offered coffee I didn't trust. I brushed my own hair, ignoring the nurse's offer, my hand steady despite the fear gnawing at me. A hearing was coming, James had gotten word to me through a sympathetic orderly. I didn't know how, but I knew Marissa was behind it. She was out there, fighting, just as I was in here. The green walls couldn't hold me forever. Daniel thought he'd trapped me, but he'd only cornered a woman with nothing to lose. I was ready, not just to survive, but to strike. The rain might have stopped, but the storm was just beginning, and I was its heart. The psychiatric wing's green walls seemed to tighten each day, their sterile sheen a constant reminder of Daniel's trap. Portland's pale sun crept through the safety glass, casting weak shadows that did little to warm the room. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, locked away but not broken. The evaluation loomed, a ticking clock toward Daniel's goal of declaring me unfit, but I felt Marissa's strength beyond these walls, her loyalty a fire that kept me burning. I'd heard whispers of a hearing, a chance to fight, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for war, and I'd walk into that courtroom with the truth as my weapon. The staff treated me like a specimen, their voices clipped, their eyes avoiding mine. They brought pills I refused, marked my chart with words like non-compliant, and watched for cracks in my composure. But I gave them none. I sat straight, spoke clearly, and memorized their names, every nurse, every orderly, every glance that betrayed unease. One nurse, a young woman with a nervous tic, whispered to another, "She doesn't seem confused to me." The other shrugged. "Doesn't matter. It's what the sun wants." Their words were fuel, proof that Daniel's script wasn't airtight. I thought of Marissa constantly, her calloused hands, her laugh that cut through the facility's gloom. I didn't know what she was doing, but I knew she was fighting for me. The letter I'd left in my old room's drawer, my vow to her, my chosen daughter, was a beacon in my mind. I pictured her finding it, reading my words, "You're my reason to keep going." She'd know I hadn't given up, that I was still Eleanor, still here. Her absence in this wing was a wound, but it sharpened my resolve. She'd come for me, and I'd be ready when she did. The morning of the hearing arrived, the air crisp with a rare break in the rain. They let me shower, handed me clean clothes, a blouse and slacks, too stiff, too new, and offered coffee I waved away. A nurse tried to brush my hair, but I took the comb myself, my hands steady. I wasn't preparing for an evaluation, I was preparing for battle. An orderly, the one who'd slipped me James's message about the hearing, whispered, "Good luck, Mrs. Walsh." His eyes held a flicker of respect, and I nodded, storing his kindness like ammunition. The van to the courthouse was cold, its tinted windows hiding me from the world. The orderlies in front chatted about lunch, calling me the old lady with the nurse problem. I memorized their words, their casual cruelty, letting it fuel me. The courthouse was a small, gray building, its broken flag snapping in the wind. They led me through a side entrance, as if I were something to hide, but inside, I felt a shift. The air was different, alive, charged with possibility. Marissa was there, in the courtroom's front row, wearing a navy blouse, her hands clasped tight. Her eyes met mine, flooded with relief and resolve, and she nodded, a silent "I'm here." My chest loosened, just a fraction. Then I saw Daniel, in a polished suit, his face smug, his lawyer whispering at his side. He didn't look at me, didn't need to, he thought he'd won. But he hadn't seen Marissa's fire, or mine. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes, scanned the room, her face unreadable. James, my lawyer, stood, his voice steady as he laid out the facts, the rushed evaluation, the discrepancies in my records, Kristen's statement about Daniel's late-night visit. Then he played the recording Marissa had captured, Daniel's voice cold and clear, "She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse, she's conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be." The courtroom stilled, the words a stain spreading across the air. Daniel's lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a look. It was my turn. I stood, my knees trembling but my voice iron. "I may be old," I said, locking eyes with the judge, "but I am not confused. I am not senile. I am not finished." I turned to Daniel, my heart a storm. "I trusted you. I loved you. I forgave you for so much. But when you let your father die, when you ignored his call to protect your own mistakes, you crossed a line I cannot forgive." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel paled, his smugness cracking. "This isn't about money," I continued. "It's about dignity, about being seen, being human. If my life is worth nothing to my son but a dollar sign, I'll spend it with someone who treats me like I matter." Marissa's eyes glistened, her hand clutching a tissue. The judge called a recess, her face unreadable. When we returned, her voice was firm. "Mrs. Walsh is of sound mind and full legal capacity. The petition for guardianship is baseless and, frankly, disturbing." She turned to Daniel. "You should consider yourself lucky she doesn't press charges." The gavel fell, and I was free, not just from the psych wing, but from Daniel's chains. Outside, Marissa hugged me, soft but sure. "You did it," she whispered. "We did," I corrected, my voice thick. Reporters waited, but we walked past, hand in hand, needing no words. The sun was warm, the air clean, and for the first time in months, I breathed fully. Daniel had tried to erase me, but I'd rewritten my story. The fight wasn't over, he'd try again, I knew, but I was ready. I had Marissa, my chosen daughter, and a truth that couldn't be silenced. The courthouse faded behind us, and I stepped into the light, not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. The air outside the courthouse was sharp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and freedom. Portland's skyline loomed in the distance, its gray spires softened by a rare sun breaking through the clouds. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, no longer caged by Daniel's schemes or the facility's green walls. Marissa's hand in mine was a tether to the life I was reclaiming, her quiet strength a mirror of my own. The judge's ruling had freed me from the psych wing, from Daniel's attempt to erase me, but I knew this was only a battle won, not the war. I'd seen his face in the courtroom, pale, cracked, but not broken. He'd come again, and I'd be ready, not with anger, but with the truth I'd fought so hard to protect. Back at the facility, my old room felt different, like a skin I'd outgrown. The beige walls, the small window, Richard's photo on the vanity, they were the same, but I wasn't. Marissa brought me pancakes with fresh strawberries, my favorite, and set them on the tray with a grin. "Victory pancakes," she said, pulling up a chair. I chuckled, the sound lighter than I'd felt in months. "We earned them." The staff moved differently now, their nods more respectful, some avoiding my gaze. A few apologized in hushed tones, nervous, as if I'd hold their complicity against them. I didn't. I remembered everything, but grudges were a weight I refused to carry. Daniel vanished after the hearing, no calls, no visits, no trace. His silence was a tactic, a retreat to regroup. I let it sit, focusing instead on what I could build. That week, I finalized the adoption with James, my lawyer. Marissa Carter became my daughter, not just in heart, but in law. The process was simple, a judge asking if this was my choice. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, without hesitation. Marissa didn't know yet, I wanted to tell her in person, when the moment was right. The paperwork was a quiet vow, she was my family, chosen for her loyalty, her love, her fight. The facility's routine no longer felt like a cage. I laughed more, spent time in the garden, helped a resident with a crossword when she asked. Marissa and I planned Mia's birthday, an outdoor party with balloons and cupcakes. One afternoon, folding laundry, I found a scarf Richard had given me, its soft wool carrying his memory. I held it to my cheek, whispering, "I hope I made you proud." A peace settled in me, a sense that I'd kept my promise to him, to myself. But the calm was fragile. James called one morning, his voice tight. "Daniel's contesting the will again. Claims undue influence. He's got a new team, pushing hard." I exhaled, not surprised. "Let him try," I said. "We're ready." The anxiety returned, not as fear, but as a dull ache. Daniel was my son, the boy I'd rocked through storms, the teenager I'd forgiven, the man I'd loved despite his coldness. Now, he was the villain, and that truth hurt more than his betrayal. I sat with Marissa in the garden that evening, the sun casting long shadows across the grass. Mia chased fireflies nearby, her laughter a melody. "I wish I could say I don't care," I said quietly, my eyes on the horizon. "But I do." Marissa took my hand, her grip warm. "You don't have to stop caring," she said. "Just stop letting him hurt you." Her words were a balm, a permission to grieve without breaking. I began packing, not in secret, but with purpose. Marissa and I had found a cottage just outside town, modest, with pale blue shutters and a garden I could tend. Mia had already claimed her swing-set spot. The facility was no longer my prison, it was a chapter closing. I placed Richard's photo in my bag, his smile a reminder of the life we'd built, the promises I'd kept. As I zipped the suitcase, I glanced around the room, its beige walls now just a backdrop to my rebirth. I was leaving, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd chosen her path. A letter arrived from Daniel's lawyer, a formal notice of his bankruptcy. His reputation had crumbled after the hearing, investors pulling out, his real estate ventures collapsing. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just exhaled, the weight of his fall a quiet justice. He'd tried to steal my life, but he'd lost his own. I folded the letter and set it aside, my focus on the future. Marissa and I drove to the cottage that afternoon, Mia singing in the back seat. The porch swing creaked as we pulled up, daisies blooming in the yard. Richard would have loved it, I thought, and for the first time, the memory didn't sting. That night, I sat on the porch with Marissa, the air smelling of grass and possibility. "You ever regret it?" she asked, her voice soft. "Giving me so much?" I looked at her, surprised. "I didn't give you anything," I said. "You earned it. Every bit." Her eyes glistened, and I took her hand. "Get used to it. You're stuck with me now." She laughed, and the sound was home. Daniel's shadow lingered, but it couldn't touch us here. I'd fought for this, my family, my peace, my name, and I'd won, not with vengeance, but with love. The sun dipped low, and I leaned back, ready for whatever came next, knowing I'd face it as Eleanor, whole and free. The cottage's garden glowed under the afternoon sun, wildflower seeds Mia and I had planted already pushing through the soil. Portland spring had arrived, soft and green, the air thick with the scent of fresh earth and promise. I sat on the porch swing, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching Mia chase butterflies with a net, her laughter a melody that stitched my heart back together. Marissa stood barefoot in the grass, her hair loose, her smile unburdened. I was Eleanor Walsh, 78, no longer defined by Daniel's betrayal or the facility's walls. I'd fought for this, my home, my family, my name, and found a peace I hadn't known I could reclaim. This was my final act, and I was writing it with love. The cottage was modest but ours, its pale blue shutters catching the light, the porch swing creaking with every sway. Inside, Richard's photo sat on the mantel, his smile a quiet blessing. Marissa's drawings from Mia decorated the walls, and the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and basil, life blooming in every corner. Daniel's silence had hardened into permanence, no calls, no emails, just the echo of his bankruptcy notice. His world had crumbled, his reputation shattered by his own greed. I didn't hate him, didn't wish him pain, but I no longer mourned the man he'd become. I'd let go of the boy I'd loved to embrace the family I'd chosen. Marissa and I had built something real. She was my daughter now, legally and in every way that mattered. I'd told her about the adoption one evening, as we unpacked boxes in the cottage, the air warm with summer's approach. Her eyes had widened, then filled with tears. "You didn't have to," she'd whispered. I'd taken her hands. "I wanted to. You're my family." She'd hugged me, fierce and sure, and in that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Mia called me Nana now, her small hand in mine as we planted daisies, her trust a gift I cherished. The final court battle had come and gone, Daniel's last attempt to contest the will a desperate gasp. He'd claimed undue influence, painting Marissa as a predator, me as a victim. But the evidence was ironclad, the recording of his voice, Kristen's statement, the medical discrepancies, the adoption papers. I stood in the courtroom, my voice clear. "I chose my legacy," I said, looking at the judge. Not out of confusion, but clarity. My son assumed he was entitled to it. He was wrong. The judge's ruling was swift, her voice cutting. "This is calculated cruelty masked as concern." Daniel's petition was denied, his behavior referred to the state bar. He left the courtroom without a glance, a shadow of the man he'd been. Outside, Marissa and I had walked to the car, her hand in mine, the sun warm on my face. We didn't need words, the victory was ours, not just in law, but in life. We moved into the cottage that week, unpacking with joy, not fear. Mia picked her bedroom, declaring it perfect for her swing-set view. I tended the garden, my hands in the dirt, planting seeds that would bloom for years. Marissa started a private care service, her nursing skills now her own to wield, and I helped with the paperwork, my librarian's precision a quiet strength. One afternoon, as I crocheted a blanket for Mia, Marissa sat beside me on the porch, reading. The air smelled of fresh grass, the world alive around us. "You're happy," she said, not a question. I smiled. "I am. Because of you." She looked down, her voice soft. "No one's ever fought for me like you did." I set the crochet down, took her hand. "And no one's ever seen me like you have." We sat in silence, the swing creaking, Mia's giggles drifting from the yard. This was home, not the bricks, but the love, the laughter, the choice to stay. I dreamed of Richard that night, dancing in our old living room, his plaid slippers absurd and perfect. His hand was on my waist, his voice a hum. When I woke, birds sang outside, sunlight filtering through the curtains. I heard Mia in her room, Marissa's soft footsteps in the kitchen. The ache of Daniel's betrayal lingered, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer defined me. I'd lost a son, but I'd gained a daughter, a granddaughter, a future. I thought of the sunflowers Richard loved, how they turned toward the light. I'd found my light, followed it, and it had led me here. As the sun dipped low, I picked a sunflower from the garden, its petals bright against the dusk. Mia ran to me, dirt on her cheeks, and I handed it to her. "For you," I said. She grinned, clutching it like a treasure. Marissa joined us, her arm around my shoulders. We stood there, 3 generations forged not by blood, but by battle, by love. I thought growing old meant fading, but I was wrong. It meant fighting, choosing, building. Daniel had tried to erase me, but I'd rewritten my story, and it ended with my hands in the earth, laughter in the air, and peace in my heart. The blood had abandoned me, but the love had saved me, and that was enough.